7.4, page 408, try it yourself 1. A research center claims that less than 30% of cellular phone users whose phone can connect to the internet have done so while at home. In a random sample of 86 adults, 20% say they have used their cellular phone to connect to the internet while at home. At alpha equals 0.05, is there enough evidence to support the researcher's claim? So our claim here, we've got our null hypothesis and our alternate hypothesis. And these are going to be the p's now because they're percents. So we've got our 30% is the claim. It's less than 30%. Since it doesn't have equality, then that is going to be the alternate hypothesis. So our claim is going to be p is less than 0.30. So that means the null hypothesis is going to be p is greater than or equal to 30. The next thing we want to do is we want to figure out what kind of test this is. This is a left-tailed test because it's less than. It always comes from the alternate hypothesis. So it's left-tailed test. So let's take a look at how that's going to look. And so since our alpha is 0.05, let's go to our table. Alpha 0.05. It's a left-tailed test, one-tailed test. So alpha 0.05 at a one-tailed test is going to be 1.645. But since it's negative, then it's going to be on the left. Negative 1.645. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to calculate our z. So the formula for z is going to be p hat minus p over the square root of pq divided by n. So let's figure out what our numbers are here. So our p is 0.30. Our p hat is going to be 20%, which is 0.20. So p hat is 0.20. Our q doesn't have to do with p hat, it has to do with p. So that's 1 minus p, which is 1 minus 0.30. So our q is going to be 0.70. And our n here is how many are there? 86 adults. So n is equal to 86. So we're going to stick those all in there. So our p hat is going to be the 0.20 minus our p, which is 0.30, divided by the square root of pq. So that's going to be 0.30 times 0.70 divided by your n, which is the 86. So let's put that in our calculator. Open parentheses, 0.20 minus 0.30 divided by the square root of your 0.3, I'm just going to put 0.3 times 0.7 divided by n, which was 86. Close parentheses there. And so we end up with negative 2.02. So z is equal to a negative 2.02. So it's on the left, and it is going to be in the critical region here, negative 2.02. And so that means that we reject the null hypothesis, h sub 0. So since we reject the h sub 0, we accept the alternate hypothesis. Therefore, there is enough evidence to support the researcher's claim because we rejected the null hypothesis, which means we accepted the alternate hypothesis, which was the claim. In 7.4, page 409, try it yourself too. A Roper poll claims that 5% of U.S. adults have had vivid dreams about UFOs. You decide to test this claim and ask a random sample of 250 U.S. adults whether they have had vivid dreams about UFOs. Of those surveyed, yes, 8% reply yes. At alpha equals 0.01, is there enough evidence to reject the claim? So our claim is that 5% of U.S. adults have had vivid dreams about UFOs. So our null hypothesis is going to be an equal to, in this case it's going to be a p, is equal to 0.05, the 5%. So that means our alternate hypothesis is going to be p is not equal to 0.05. This tells us that it's going to be a two-tailed test. So let's go ahead and get that started. So our two-tailed test is going to have a positive and a negative z sub 0, critical value. And so now we need our alpha is 0.01. So we have two-tailed, the alpha is 0.01. So we got alpha is two-tailed, 0.01, and that's going to give us, all the way down to the bottom, 2.576 plus or minus. So we're going to have a negative 2.576 and a positive 2.576. And now let's take a look at the other information that we need to calculate our z. We know here that the n is 250. We've got a p hat of what you found, which is 8%, so that'll be 0.08. Now for our formula for z, we're going to need to calculate p hat minus p over the square root of pq over n. So we've got our p hat and our p, we've got our n, we just need our q. So if our p is 0.05, then our q is going to be 0.95, because that's 1 minus p, which was 0.05. And so that's going to give us 0.08 minus 0.05 divided by the square root of 0.05 times 0.95 divided by our sample size, which was 250. So let's put that in our calculator. Parentheses 0.08 minus 0.05 close parentheses divided by the square root of p, which was 0.05, times the q, which was 0.95, divided by our sample size, which was 250. And that'll give us 2.176. So we'll go with 2.18. So that's going to give us 2.18. So 2.18 is not in the critical region, and therefore we do not reject the null hypothesis. So do not reject the H sub 0. Now the H sub 0, we forgot to label this, is the claim, because they wanted to say that 5% have vivid dreams. So CL is my claim here. Therefore, there is not enough evidence to reject the claim that 5% of adults have vivid dreams about UFOs. Section 7.4, page 410, try it yourself 3. The Pew Research Center claims that more than 30% of U.S. adults regularly watch the Weather Channel. You decide to test this claim and ask a random sample of 75 adults whether they regularly watch the Weather Channel. Of the 75 adults, 27 respond yes. At alpha equals 0.01, is there enough evidence to support the claim? And so our claim is that more than 30% watch the Weather Channel. So that's our P. It's going to be greater than 0.30. Since it's not an equality, it's going to be the alternate hypothesis. So our null hypothesis is going to be the opposite of greater than, which is less than or equal to. So the null hypothesis is P is less than or equal to 0.30. Since it's greater than, that means it's going to be a right tail test. And so that's going to be a positive critical region and a positive critical value. So our right tail test here, there's our 0, is going to be alpha is 0.01 at the right tail. So let's find our critical value. Alpha is 0.01 with a one tail test all the way down to the bottom. That's going to be positive 2.326. The next thing we need to do is we need to find our z value. So the formula for z is going to be p hat minus p over the square root of p times q divided by n. So we need to find our values. So our p hat is going to be what we do when we calculate 27 out of 75. So our n is going to be 75. We also need that n to calculate our p hat. They didn't give us the sample. They want us to calculate that. So 27 out of 75 will give us a p hat of 0.36. So that's going to give us our p hat. Now we need to find our q, which is 1 minus p. And the p is 0.30. So that'll give us 1 minus 0.30 or 0.70. So I'll put that in our formula. We're going to have our p hat, which is 0.36, minus our p, which is 0.30, divided by the square root of the p of 0.30 times the q of 0.70 divided by our sample size n, which is 75. So let's put that in our calculator. So we've got the 0.36 minus 0.30 close parentheses divided by the square root of our p, which is 0.3 or 0.30 times our q of 0.7 divided by the sample size of 75. And so that'll give us 1.13 rounded correctly. So our z is equal to 1.13. If we put that on our curve here, 1.13 is not in the critical region. Therefore, we do not reject the null hypothesis. And our claim was the alternate hypothesis here. That was our claim. So if we do not reject the null hypothesis, which is our H sub 0, then we do reject the alternate hypothesis. Therefore, there is not enough evidence to support the claim that more than 30% of U.S. adults regularly watch the Weather Channel.